I'm John Grafft, and I love Chicago real estate. Between showings, I stop in my favorite places, talk with local business owners, and bring their story to you. This is my Chicago.
That's what I love about what you do. It's not about tacking on things to create more and more. It's almost like trying to pull things away to create less and less. So it's simple, but just what needs to be there.
That's the hardest architecture to do, to make it look simple, but have all the finishes, all the system stuff, all the furnishings, all the detail be as clean as possible. That's the hardest thing to do. And make it look simple, make it look like clean, make it look crisp. That's about impossible to do unless you're really paying attention to every detail.
How did you get your start in this? Why did you want to be an architect?
In high school, I was a musician. I played French horn in the band and the orchestra, and because it was left-handed, I'm left-handed.
Okay.
It's maybe the only instrument that is fingered left-handed. I'm not totally sure.
The French horn is?
The French horn, yeah.
Oh, so no matter what, it's always
Left-handed.
Huh, okay.
I started on trumpet, and my dad made there's a pinky finger hold on a trumpet to help hold your hand in place when you're playing. He had it put on the other side of the trumpet so I could play it left-handed. But then, you know, your elbow's doing this and the guy next to you is doing that. So once I found out French horn was fingered left-handed, that was it, I was done. But then I started playing guitar and got in a couple really good bands, and we played throughout the Midwest. And so I always liked that creativity and kind of rebellion, I guess, a little bit from the standard. But the creativity of it was probably the most striking thing to me. But at the same time, I was good in math. And my family, both my brothers went through college in engineering. So I thought I had to do the same thing. So I went for a year in engineering, and I didn't like it. It was easy enough to do, but I didn't really like it. And so in the summer—
What was it? What did you like about it?
You're basically just solving equations.
Okay.
And once you're done solving equations, it's done. It's very strict, it has to be, especially structural engineering, it has to be right on. And it didn't give me a sense of creativity, or an outlet for that anyway, that I'd had with music all the time. And so I said, I gotta look for something else. I like part of it because I like the math part, but if you look at music, that's what music is. Math is in music. Very much so. And so in the summers, the lead guitarist in our band worked for the Environmental Protection Agency, and he got me a summer job there, and I was moaning to him about, I just am not liking engineering. He said, well, why don't you try architecture? I mean, that's you'll have a creative outlet that way. And then I was sold. I transferred a pretty good amount of my credits because architecture is engineering too. It's as much science as it is art, of course. And fell right into it, loved it ever after that.
And so you start with an apprentice program. How do you get into the actual field?
Well, the schooling is 6 years,
Okay.
4 years undergraduate, 2 years graduate. Then the requirements are you work for 3 years for an architectural firm that is licensed, that can train you in a series of different aspects of what architecture is, if it's construction management, if it's design, if it's schematic design, if it's construction documents. You have to put 3 years in, and then after that point you can take an exam to get licensed.
Okay.
And you could actually take it before the 3 years, but you still got to put the 3 years in before you can get licensed.
Okay.
And so I did that, worked for, when I graduated, I could have either played music. I'm from Springfield, Illinois, so I could have played music with a band there and made a good, for a musician, a relatively good living. That's not really a good living. No
Yeah.
musicians actually live well financially. And or I could have gone to Milwaukee. That was the highest paying place to go if I wanted to go in architecture. And I thought, well, I'm okay as a musician, but I'm certainly not great. And I thought, well, let's break out of Springfield too. Let's see what the world's all about. So I moved to Milwaukee, cold, didn't know anything about it. I think it was the worst winter they'd ever had that year.
Of course.
Thought, what am I doing here a little bit? I got the job because I'd been sitting in my rendering professor's office. We were going through a rendering I'd done, and he got the call from the Milwaukee firm saying, hey, got any guys that you'd recommend coming up here? And so that's how I got it. And then I worked for them for about 3 years. And then I kept moving up the chain of good architecture firms in Milwaukee. Did that for about the course of about 10 years. And then thought, I don't like the corporate world very much either.
Mm-hmm. What was it about it?
How to say it nicely, it isn't really all about architecture.
Okay.
It's about gamesmanship. How can you get up the corporate ladder a little bit faster than the next guy? It pigeonholes architects that could be fabulous architects, but all they're doing is construction documents. It doesn't let them grow to be designers or, you come in and right away I had done design mainly, but I was very good at doing remodelings of commercial buildings and civic buildings. I knew how to deal with the irregularities if you're combining two buildings together, an old and a new.
Okay.
And so I kind of had a position both in design and in the construction management part of it. But there were so many corporate games that weren't even good for the clients. It was just about what's good for us and how do we keep the firm going. And I can understand that to a point, but if you're a young architect, you're still idealistic to a point, That's what they try to give you, at least in the university. They want you to get as much of the creative aspect of it as possible, because they know once you go into the real world, it's not going to be that way.
You're going to have assignments.
You're going to have assignments. It's not going to be, you can just spend all day designing and sketching and thinking about the world in general and how it could be a better place with your buildings in it. It's just, it brings you down right away. And the first firm I worked for was a design build firm, where architecture is even thought less of.
Okay.
Architecture is a means to get to the construction cost and the construction amount of money that's out there. So they'll use the design and say, hey, we're design build. We design and we build. And how can you have it any better than that? Because you've got the design aspect and the build aspect of it. And I was one of the design people there. And they had salesmen. They used to do financial institutions throughout the Midwest.
Were the salesmen architects, or they just purely?
Oh no, they could have been selling appliances the week before. So they used to regularly come down and say, don't make the building look so good. We'll never get the bosses to approve it. They'll want to cut back and make it look good, but be as cheap as possible. Don't put more than 4 corners on a building, because each corner costs an extra $500 for the foundation guys to do the corner. It was like, oh my God, that was really a downer. But at the same time, I got to meet a lot of great people there, and from all walks of life, because it attracted a lot of people, and it was a very financially good firm. They were making a lot of money, so they could bring a lot of people in. I met Les Leffingwell's art on my walls. I met him there. He was a renderer. All he did was render buildings all day long there.
Okay. So that could be someone's job in a company, just to create renderings like that.
Actually, you probably outsource them more nowadays. And
Yes.
It's just rendering firms, and they can be anywhere in China. They could be in China.
I know when I've gotten renderings, they've come from Ukraine and one of those other countries, I think Bulgaria. You know, just,
Well, like, in the Renaissance times, there were guys that just did the skies and guys that just did the trees and guys that, it's not a new concept where you'd have just the rendering people doing the renderings.
I never thought about that. So when they were doing those works of art in the Renaissance, they had different people come in to finish the different elements of it?
Yeah. They had their, it was guilds back then, and so they'd bring the younger people in that had talent, but maybe not the talent of Rembrandt, of course, and they would do the backgrounds, and then that was not uncommon back then. Yeah.
Was there a
That's
hair?
why nothing is new, really.
Yeah.
That was done.
Was there a hair that kind of broke the camel's back when you were working? Something that said, I want to leave and go do this on
At the
myself?
corporate world?
Yes.
Yeah.
What was that?
Well, there was a number of them, but the biggest one was architectural firms, bigger firms typically have an interior design department, and that's not architects, it's designers, and not a licensed situation, at least not back when I was doing that. There's a little bit more, there's push to have interior designers be licensed now. But they hired a person that was all image, all schmoozing clients. And they could care less what the architecture or the interior design was. And so it got to be on a couple of my projects where they came in. They didn't let, for example, they didn't let the architects do the interior design. That was probably one of the bigger things that bothered me.
Okay.
Because architecture isn't just about what's on the outside surface and then something else on the inside surface. Anything good in architecture.
It all blends together. It's creating
Has
one
to be
unified project.
What are you designing on the outside? What's the fit in there? What's going in there? How's it going to feel? What's it gonna convey to the user, to the owner, to a client, to the person's home, if it's a home? You can't just design it's done all the time, but you can't design it outside of a home and then expect the inside to be done by somebody else. Not if you truly want the home to be architecturally designed throughout and detailed so that the interiors and the sense of space on the inside reflects what the outside is saying when you first approach the home or building or anything else. But anyway, the interior designer just picked a bunch of stuff and pinned. We had walls where we'd pin up everything to look at it. And, there was certain furniture with square legs, certain furniture with round legs, certain metal, different finishes back where there wasn't so much mix of metals, of finishes. And it was so bad. And they basically said,
We don't care.
we don't care. We got this job, we're gonna finish this job and move on to the next one. And I thought, well, is this architecture or
How do you get
what
the next
is
job?
this?
I mean, you can get
I
this
went out
job,
on-
great, but you have to get the next one based on your past job.
Well, a lot of it's marketing.
Yeah.
A lot of it's marketing, and if you build up a base of doing museums as an architectural firm, there's no firm like mine that's ever gonna get a museum.
Yeah.
Because it's you're doing a qualification submittal on museum RFPs or anything, requests for proposals. You have to submit your qualifications to show that you know how to do a museum. And if you've never done a museum before, that's the first one they throw out.
Yeah, no one's going to gamble on that.
Nobody's going to gamble on that. And so it's unless you've been at a firm that has done that, where you can kind of pull and you've been a part of those museums during that firm, and you pull away and start your own firm, then you can. Then you have a chance to do it. But without that, it's very difficult.
And so you saw them going in that direction, not caring about the actual product? And is that when you said, I'm good, I'm gonna try this out on my own?
Well, I think that I don't want to be too harsh on them, because there were a number of people there, and especially the ones that were in my group, we really worked to make every detail as beautiful as the complete composition of the building. And they were mainly young people. I was relatively young too, of course, but they were even younger, like almost a generation younger, and we had a great time.
Okay.
And we did really great things, but I could see that the corporate part of it, that was just a small part of it. The corporate part was more about marketing,
Okay.
making sure we bring in the projects that are governed by boards that are somewhat removed from what the product really needs to look like.
Got it.
And
So does that make the decision making less while it's being constructed, in terms of from the principal, from the client? Are they less involved in the process?
at the firms I worked at, the principals they're usually assigned one principal to each of the projects.
Okay.
But the principal was really not, the principal, to the extent of what the principal did, was either to lock in the project from a marketing standpoint at the initial presentations, that for sure, but then also if they were a design, there were different principals. There were principals that were just about the management of the firm. There were principals that were strictly design principals. There were principals that were marketing, basically marketing. They were all architects, registered architects, but they didn't, the management of the office principal didn't intermix with the design principal.
Makes sense.
Two different things. And so if the project was more, if it was a museum, the design principal would be the one leading the show, because that's a very highly, typically very highly detailed and trying to set a mark almost for the firm, a project like that. If it's an industrial complex, like maybe the firm management principal would be the one in control, because the design part of that, they would put that, you know, design wouldn't be as important on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, the principals would typically participate in design critiques as it's going through the stages from schematic design through construction documents. And then, but they would never go to construction administration meetings or anything like that. The last thing they would do is maybe attend the grand opening.
Okay. So they're there in the beginning, they're there in the end.
Right.
And maybe overseeing things in the middle, but probably there's a manager or someone doing that.
They'd come over and say, especially if the design principal was a part of your project,
Mm-hmm.
which I had a number of those, and those were the best projects, obviously, because I was very sensitive about the design myself. But they'd come over and sit at your desk, and we'd just sketch away at stuff. So there was, I don't want it to sound like it was totally bad.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. It was very creative at times, and you got to see a lot of different building types. In a large firm, there's always, even if it's not in your studio of work that you're working on, you still can go around the firm and see all kinds of other amazing work going on. But in the end, I didn't feel I was, if I didn't play the games and do the corporate work, which I didn't really enjoy, I didn't feel it was right even for them that I stay there. And it was at a point where one of the interior designers that was there said, go out on your own. Yeah. I'll go with you. We'll do, you always talk about the interior design being separated from the architecture. We'll go together and we'll do it together. And that and landscape too. Landscape architecture is almost like a whole nother field that doesn't.
I feel like that's a different mindset. Even.
I know,
yeah.
And it doesn't get integrated well, except.
I can never see that.
Yeah.
I cannot see the landscape aspect of design. I don't get it. It doesn't stand out to me the way some other things do on the exterior and interior. I have no idea.
It's just placing plants, you know, and maybe some turf over here, and then maybe some a Zen garden over there.
But some people make it look so good, and they use lighting to illuminate just the right places. I mean, you can look at some homes, and if you look at them during the day, they look whatever. And then when you see them at night with the lights on them, they seem grand and illustrious and like, wow, I want to go see what that is. And then during the day, whatever.
That's, again, even when that's done, I would bet that the landscape work was done independent of the architectural work.
Think so?
That maybe they saw the home was already built, maybe, and then they brought the landscape.
I think you're usually right on that.
To figure out how to put a pretty face on it from a green standpoint.
Any home I've seen, more so in the suburbs that's been being built, you're absolutely right. The landscaping is an afterthought.
Yeah, it's just
the home's done. Now let's get the contractor in here. Let's figure this out.
Yeah, it's never integrated with the architecture.
So what's the best project for you now? What do you like working on? What's your preference?
I still like doing individual condominiums and working with clients that don't want just a cookie cutter redo. I like doing remodeling still. I really like the challenge of any good architect can take and build a new building in a green space, somewhere where there's no constraints as far as size, width, length, height. But to try to do that in a urban neighborhood, try to do something that's contextual to the other buildings in the neighborhood, that respects them. That doesn't mean it has to be matchy-matchy to them, but that respects them, respects the scale, respects what I call the public realm, which is the streetscape, the pedestrians, all of that. Do that in a tightly constrained manner and still do a beautiful work of art that's as functional as it is beautiful. Not a lot of architects can do that. It's hard to do. It's very hard to do and pull it off completely. I mean, many succeed in most parts, but then there's always something, like they put the loading docks right where it totally disturbs all the neighbors on that street. And so they forever ruined that street now.
You see that all the time. I remember when they were doing this project right here, this project took, it seemed like a decade to get off the ground. And there were so many conversations about, okay, where are people going to load in their groceries? Like for one of the grocery stores on the other side, when they were doing, actually not this development, but a development down the way. And I remember talking about that, because well, this is a main street that people are using right now. How is that traffic configuration going to change when we put this building here? And it's true, okay, you have this new building, it's a new destination, people are going to be coming and going from it. How will us building this here affect the surrounding community?
Right. And a lot of times that's not done well. And then at least a portion of the local neighborhood is hurt by the new development. But you can't ever be totally against development.
Yes.
That's like worse than trying to work either in an activist mode or through government to make sure the developments that are done are as contextual and protective of the neighborhood as possible. And I don't know how many good developers understand that, that if they actually add to the neighborhood, it adds to the value of their development. The ones that come in and just try to blow out whatever's there just to make a buck, it hurts their bottom line too, because they've potentially killed the sense of place of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And they want to add to that, not take away from it. And in great neighborhoods, anyway.
That's like when you see a McMansion built on the street, right? And you're looking, there's all these nice, beautiful homes, and there's this monstrosity of a home that really just catches you off guard. I mean, it's casting a shadow on the street over you. Like, what is this doing here? And that's the point of zoning. But sometimes zoning can be a little
still build
almost
lot line to lot line. And if the rest of the neighborhood hadn't done that, even though it's allowed now by code, you'll get exactly what you said, a monstrosity sticking out, totally out of scale. Usually the finishes aren't very good. They try to make it look like it's an expensive home.
Yeah.
But it's all fake. It's like Las Vegas. It's just on the face.
It's all glitz and glamour.
Yeah.
And that's going back to how we started this conversation, was about the originality and the simplicity of a design. It's almost the opposite of that. Like, what can we add to make this look more expensive?
Yeah, what can we paste on it?
Yes, paste. I like that.
Let's put an arch here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put a dormer over there. Wouldn't that be nice? It adds interest. It adds beauty.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, it's like decoupage architecture.
What's that?
Decoupage is where you take a box and then you cut out newspaper clippings and other things that are important to you, because you're going to put something in this box that maybe has to do with whatever those clippings are, and then you put paste down and you put a glaze over it, and then now that box is decorative because it's got these things that you did, and whatever's in it relates to that. But that's all architecture is, when you're just pasting dormers on it, putting arches on it, and that's just a surface treatment. It's like paint. It's really not what architecture is meant to be. It's sad in a way, because most things could be so much more if they didn't look at it that way.
Okay.
But that's not how most buildings are constructed either. The architect is usually just a line item in a developer's listing of costs. Architecture is just a line item.
That's me. I'm just a line item. Yeah.
You're just a line item.
Absolutely.
Too. That's right.
Just a line item.
That's right.
And the easiest line item to reduce, not eliminate, but reduce.
Same with architecture.
Yeah. Just trying
like
to pinch
concrete.
everything out of it.
Concrete's a line item. Right under that's architecture. Real estate's under that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you see trends going now in design?
There's a much more breakaway from historical reference, I think, now, and trying to see what you can do, what boundary you can push. And I think that's great for architecture. It's actually something I think that's a long time coming. I think there's also a bit of unconnectedness amongst architects. Like, they don't really know where it's going.
Okay.
And so there's not a lot of, okay, we're on the right path now. We're going to do a more deconstructivist method of building nowadays. I think it's still all over the map.
It doesn't seem like there's an era that we're in. You know, you look at modernist eras, Art Deco, things like this.
Postmodern.
Yeah. There's no symbol or theme of what's happening in today's design spectrum.
I think there's a certain groups that are really, all of architecture is trying to do this, but there are certain groups that are really pushing it, is not just sustainable, but truly urban architecture that has zero carbon footprint.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, I wish architecture in general were doing that, striving for that more so, because of the climate issues we have, and because constructing a building and operating a building is so energy intensive. And so I know that's a big part of what a number of groups of architects around the world are doing. I don't think they've achieved anything that's like revolutionary as far as what you would call a style that's emerging.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why you're seeing all these, it seems like there isn't anything really that's a common theme.
Yes.
That you can see in architecture nowadays, where you could say, okay, this is of the 2020s, this is the architecture of the 2020s.
Well, you can see the building that Apple built, that circle, very cool. And then you have a building like the REI building that was built in Seattle that was bought by, I think, Facebook or Amazon or one of those companies. And everything just looks different. Everything, and not bad, there just doesn't seem to be the theme you're referring to.
Well, I think they are striving to be contextual, to relate to what not only what the location is, but very much so what Apple's mantra is as far as work environment. And so that's another thing, that if it's hard, if you build a spec building, how does that fit? It's just, you're not designing for a client anymore.
Yeah, it has to be made for the masses. And that's why so many things look generic.
That's
why
right.
when you look at new construction, it's great to get in it when you can make some of those decisions as the owner, because otherwise it's just a template. We all know what that looks like. I can walk in with my eyes closed.
It's just a box with some things pasted on it, and hopefully it attracts the widest demographic of firms that they're trying to fill that building with.
Exactly.
So that's not great architecture. That's just economics, maybe.
You see any future of where things are going? You talked about carbon neutral or net carbon. Any other themes that you see in the field?
I think we're always looking at new technologies as far as constructability and how to do that. I don't think there's different, like assemblies. They're looking very much at assemblies. They have, though. This is nothing new. I guess I'm not saying anything new about that. But how wall systems work, how they breathe, how they expel moisture or keep moisture in if they need to. Thermal envelopes, how to handle.
What's a thermal envelope?
It's the amount of heat that's escaping from the building and the amount of cooling that you're trying to keep in the building. It's the entire envelope from the foundation up through the walls, up through the roof, and how to minimize the bridging of the thermal bridging. Like you can, in between the studs, just for a typical home, you've got solid insulation there, but every stud is a bridge in the thermal capacity of that wall, and it's not as good as the areas where there isn't a stud and you have the insulation. So that's looked at in every building. How can we minimize, like buildings with balconies, the concrete slab that is the bottom of the balcony, they have systems now where it's basically just the rebar, and there is an isolation joint between that concrete and the concrete of the floor just inside the balcony doors to minimize, if that's just concrete from the inside coming to the outside, which there's thousands and thousands of buildings built that way. The outside concrete's 0 degrees in winter. And so inside those doors, it's like 10 degrees, and then it gets to be 20, 40, 60, 75 degrees as you get into the building. So how to try to, and that's just sucking heat out of the home at every one of those points, because the heat's trying to get to that cold. And so there's things like that that are creating a better building envelope is, on the technological side of architecture, is a very large emphasis now, especially with the climate issues. How can we heat the space and cool the space for less cost, less energy, and some of these thermal bridging issues and other building envelope assemblies is a way to do that. But I think we need much more than that, because even new ways of how to create energy, how a building can get to carbon neutral.
I was working with a developer once, and when you're talking about the thermal envelopes, it reminded me of that. He had the exterior wall and then the interior wall, which is basically one, right? I mean, you have the exterior wall, but it's...
Well, they build them where they're 3 feet apart, and there's a whole air cavity up and down.
And that was his goal. And in Chicago, at least these developers that I've seen, they're doing everything super next to each other. But this one developer wanted that space in between to have that cavity like you're talking about, to do that, to reduce the energy transfer between the exterior and the interior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the ways to do it. The people that are building the buildings want to minimize that as much as possible because that's a cost to them.
Yeah.
The bigger that wall is, it means the less square footage on the inside.
Exactly.
It's rentable square footage or sellable. And so it's a fight. It's a fight between the trying to create a better building envelope versus the economics of it. Because anything can be done and made very close to energy neutral, but there's no windows, there's very thick walls.
Well, windows are always a funny thing because there's obviously energy loss when you see all this, but how could you not have them?
Right. You have to design with that in mind, and I think there has to be more energy sources developed, which is not architecture really. It could be, but
we need Elon Musk in here to talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. Like, why couldn't these buildings have their own power plant and create their own energy and not draw from the grid?
Yeah, that's a cool concept. Not pulling from the grid or selling your energy.
Why couldn't your own condo, why couldn't you do that? You can put a through-the-wall window air conditioner in it that's self-contained. All it's doing is drawing electricity. So why couldn't you create your own mini power plant in your condo?
That'd be awesome.
That would be, then you'd start getting to a carbon neutral standpoint.
What are some of your favorite buildings in Chicago?
I was thinking about that the other day. One that I think was a game changer in Chicago is Aqua.
Okay.
By Jeannie Gang.
I hate her units though, or those units.
Well,
they're so
that's
small.
Just what I was going to say.
And there's low ceiling heights too.
The building it changed the world in how you saw the form of a large skyscraper building.
That took me right back to Gaudi in Barcelona, and seeing that, you're like, that's his. Clearly the inspiration came from Gaudi.
But then you get up close, and it's like you said, the railings look kind of chintzy.
The railings definitely do.
The common areas, and maybe she didn't do those. I'm not sure she did. Sometimes that isn't the case. But I think that was the image of that building and how it affects a person just sequentially traveling around it or traveling through Chicago. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
It's a beautiful building to look at.
Yeah.
We have few buildings.
Well, it changes when you walk around it. It changes. How many buildings? This building will never change. Walk around all four sides.
Yeah.
Look the same.
That's a great point. I've never thought about it that way. You're right. It's almost iridescent in how you view it because of that. Yeah. Because every foot you go, it's a little different. Yeah. From a different angle.
And the closer you go, and where you look up more versus from a distance where you look.
That's a really cool look. Just looking
flowing
up at
in
it.
And out as you look up. Yeah. Very creative. Very creative. Yeah.
So you've done some really cool single family projects as well. How do you change your mindset when you're going from a single family to a condo?
To me, it's
or do you?
It's about the client. I don't really change my mindset. First of all, I'm not trying to make a name for myself. I'm trying to make a place for the client. I'm trying to do the highest level of architecture of what maybe the client isn't familiar with the highest level of functionality and sense of art or sense of space for them in the manner of who they are and how they live. And so a townhome, for example, it's a different structure than a condo and a tower, but the client relationship is the same. Mm-hmm. And so if you're really trying to design the most beautiful space and functional space for a client, it doesn't even have to be a home. So that's, to me, what architecture, and if you can pull it off, if you can pull that off, that's a great architect.
What type of teams do you work with? You know, it's a lot for just one person to handle. How do you distribute those roles to different people to accomplish the end goal?
First of all, it's hard for me to delegate. That's one reason I went out on my own.
Okay.
But at the larger firms I worked at, usually the people under you were doing documentation, mainly construction documents. But at the same time, when you went into the construction document phase, architecturally, it still wasn't all designed. And I found in working with the large firms that the best ones were the ones that were still trying to push the envelope on the design during the construction document phase.
So while you're still doing the planning, while you're still doing the creating, pushing the envelope there.
You start drawing the final drawings for bidding.
Yeah.
And so there's some conflict there because you haven't resolved all the details yet architecturally in the design.
Because it's just a shell.
But you're building it, but you're doing drawings to build it.
Yes.
So you're creating details just in those drawings.
That you don't even know if you can really do.
You don't even know if they relate to what the designers in the firm were thinking.
That makes sense.
Like a window edge, a roof edge, an interior lobby space, you know, what the finishes haven't necessarily even been selected yet.
And so when you're bidding on that, you have to go into it as if they already have? Is that part of the issue?
No, this is still in the firm,
okay.
In the architectural firm. My point on that was just that the really good design firms don't stop the design at the end of design development. It goes all the way through the construction documents and many times into the field, because there's always something that would come up in the field and you'd have to resolve it. The best firms were the ones that could still resolve it and make it look like that was always the way it was meant to be.
Got it.
So the people so anyway, in the larger firms, it was the younger people were doing, you know, the toilet room elevations and the door schedules and the, you know, all the stuff that has to go into a building but has no glamour to it.
They're making their bones, they're paying their dues.
They're paying their dues,
Yeah.
They're getting to see the overall scope of how a project goes together from start to finish, but they're not getting to work on it. And then on every aspect. But then once they, like I got known for being good with remodeling projects. That's about all I ever did after that.
Okay.
Once they knew that, okay, give that one to him.
Yeah.
You know, so I didn't get a new project in a green site somewhere where I didn't have any constraints like that, which I liked because I thought I enjoyed trying the difficulty. I enjoyed the difficulty of trying to pull that off. But that's the only building type I saw was a remodeling.
Well, I imagine that's part of the beauty of doing what you do is you're given a budget, you're giving it a design. Those things rarely go hand in hand. And you have to figure out how to make this work by not cheapening out on materials or design or, safety, of course. I remember hearing about the Hancock and how those X's save tens of millions of dollars in order to do that. Do you know that story? No? I've heard that. I need to meet someone who can explain it to me better.
They probably save steel in the by making the bracing a part of the design. They didn't have to build something else to cover it all up. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that that manner of bracing was probably very cost efficient from a structural standpoint.
So that's what it's about. That the bracing becomes part of the exterior, so therefore you're not covering it with anything, so you save a complete step right there, right?
Well, it's still covered
with
aluminum. The beauty of the Hancock is the structure is expressed. It says what the building is. It doesn't hide the structure behind a facade of something else, and that's the beauty of it. It says this is the essence of this building. And to express the structure in that manner is the most honest way to do architecture. Like, you don't know how this building behind you is framed. Who knows? Who knows where the columns are or anything? There's nothing that really expresses that. And that's how a lot of buildings are done. But this gets again back to the detailing of architecture, detailed all the way through the building. That structure was important in the aspect of expressing what that building was all about. And I think if they would have just hidden it behind a wall of glass, 96 stories high, it definitely would not be the same building and would not have received the iconic status it received.
So part of it's being like an honest building.
Absolutely.
I never thought about architecture that way. That's really cool.
That's why Las Vegas, they're honest because they're saying we're just going to be in your face.
Yeah.
So they're honest about it that way. But then to take Las Vegas and put it on the facade of a McMansion, that's about as dishonest as you can get. And that's just horrible architecture. So, but yeah, honesty. You also, there's a certain thing about architecture that is important to know, but I don't think it's talked about very much. Architecture isn't about just a building sitting there. It's about an aqua, this beautiful thing about aqua. It's the sequential sense of walking through a building, walking around a building. How does it feel when you walk in to the Apple store in Manhattan and it's just a cube? What's the sense? And then you have to go down. Or the Louvre, I.M. Pei's Louvre, the pyramid. The sense of that is as important as that pyramid. The sense of entry coming in there. And if there's a space-time continuum, as they call it, but it's basically the building is more important the best buildings are more important when you walk through them and experience them than just see them on a postcard. If that's the most beautiful architecture is architecture that inspires you when you walk through it or around it or feel it in the context of where it's at. It's not a static thing. It's like music. Music is not static, but it has a rhythm and it has a mathematical component to it, just as architecture does with the science of it. But there's the art of it, and how do you combine the two? And that's what I'm talking about with sequence and the sense of space and the how that affects you. And it can be no architecture at all. It could be a void, but you get the counterplay of an open space that's a part of the architecture, but it's not a built thing. It's just open, and that enclosure of the architecture surrounding that open space contributes to what the beauty of the architecture is. So it's not just bricks and mortar and stone and steel.
Thinking about the static and then comparing it to music is right on, because I can listen to a song that I've heard 100 times and I might hear something I've never heard before. And I can look at a building I've seen 100 times and I will notice something I've never seen before. And those things absolutely lay true within each other. I notice it all the time when I'm walking around my neighborhood. You just look up, you're like, is that all? Every day I see something I hadn't seen before. And it could be your vantage point, it could be your perspective. You could have had more coffee that day, whatever it is. It's just, you're jolted to see it.
You were looking up instead of down?
Yeah. So we've worked together. I've sold 2 places for you now. Can we talk a little bit about that experience and what you liked about working with me?
Sure. Yeah. That first, or the bad part first?
The bad first, please, always.
Working with you is a rare thing for the amount of real estate I've seen and worked with. Not necessarily that I've purchased, but just seeing the realtors work with my clients, for example, when they're looking for a home to buy. Because you understand the design. like when I talk about it, you understand why it was done the way I did it. Maybe not the way someone else would like it, but there was a rationale for why a space was done the way it was, or a finish was put in the way it was, or a color of a tile was done the way it was. There's a rationale for it that even from our first one, I tried to talk with you about how that, why I did it the way that I did it. And you grasp that. And sometimes it's like seeing a condo, for example, with no furniture in it, versus seeing a condo with furniture that was designed specifically for that unit. And the different sense of that. That's what I'm trying to do when I talk with you about the concepts of the architecture of what I'm doing on a project that I've worked on. And you get it, but the cool thing is you can explain it to someone that maybe doesn't get it, a potential buyer. And that's always been successful for our stuff we've worked on. And that is the best thing about working with you, I think, is that you're not just schlepping real estate. You're really trying to sell good stuff and reasons why they're good, and not my stuff, I'm not talking about my stuff, but I truly do believe you understand that there's a reason why architecture is good and architecture is bad. And you've been very honest with me, and I try to be very honest with what I do, and clean and detailed and straightforward, but very functional. And you've always grasped that. It's been great. It's been great.
If I had a skill, I have a few skills.
You have a few skills, for sure.
I think you just really hit it. When I'm working with someone long enough, I can understand why they did what they did. Or from the flip side of that, when I work with a buyer, I can understand what they're looking for. And when I find it, sometimes I might feel, I will feel pushy, but it's more so me saying, this is it. Like, look at this. Look at this for what it is. This is what you're looking for. You may not know it yet, but this is it. And then sometimes I'm completely wrong.
Well, nobody's always going to get it right. I certainly have not always gotten architecture right. And a part of it is experimental. You're always trying to do, or at least I'm always trying to do something better than I did it the last time.
I hope so.
That's why I always try to not do the same type of condominium unit twice. I always try to look for something different and push the envelope that way. But I don't try to push the envelope in a way that isn't still functional, still has a sense of science, has a sense of art to it. But it won't typically be like the unit right across the hall. It will be much more refined. And you understand that. You get that, and you can present it to a buyer. And you understand, I don't know it from the buyer side with you, but you seem to be able to understand what the buyer's looking for too, which, boy, if you've got both of those talents, that's a great realtor.
Well, I think that's part of, it's funny, you're making me realize things about myself, but because I'm working in it every day, because I'm with different people, but looking at the same things more or less, I understand what people are truly looking for when they're buying. Because people aren't just buying for the location, they're not just buying for the building, they're not just buying for the finishes. It's this combination of everything, and based on the person, the importance of each element is completely up or down.
Yeah.
Some people could care less about design, they just want the location.
Right.
I have a client right now where we're looking at some pretty high-end homes. We're in like 2.5 range, 2.5 million. I showed him a 10,000 square foot warehouse in Bucktown that was converted to a single family home. Coolest space I've ever seen. If I had the money, I'd pull down, buy it right now. And then a few days later, I showed him a Gold Coast row home that's a little over 5,000 square feet. done to the nines. And both were done by designers. So the first one, the warehouse, was an architect who did it, a wife and husband who were architects. And then the other one is a designer who built this. And you can feel their heart and their passion and their sweat in both projects completely, especially the warehouse. The warehouse is so well thought out and so well designed. When you see it, it's one of those places where every time, I've only been there once, but if every time I went there, I know I'd find something new and some thought about what they did.
Something else resolved that you didn't realize it was until you looked at it. Some of the best architecture to me is when it's not apparent right away, because there's multiple layers of design within the unit that have been done, and so the subtlety and the fact that you don't realize it until you've experienced the space is a higher level of design.
Experiencing a space is awesome. I've always thought it'd be hilarious if you could just give someone a 24-hour period in a condo, right? You want to make this your home? Okay, live here for 24 hours. No one would ever do that, I don't think. But
probably not.
But to do that, I don't know if it would benefit or if it would hinder the sales process. But it would be a good concept. It's a funny idea to throw around.
It depends on the client.
Yeah.
Totally. Because I've had clients that just wanted a beautiful home. Didn't know what that meant, really. It was very hard to get out of them from my standpoint, what that meant to them too. And so I think that's true for a lot of architects. It's very hard with certain clients to understand what they really want. And it's hard for them to express that because they're not architects. They can't speak in that language. So a really good architect will get that out of them in another way, in their own words or images. A lot of images can be used to help portray a sense of a space that a client has seen somewhere else. There is a downside to that, though, because they could pick all images of Southern California where they don't have the thermal issues we have here, and wide open interior outdoor spaces, really well connected, that you couldn't do here. But I don't know about living in a space 24 hours. I was going to go to another point about architectural education, but I don't know if I want to go there or not.
Okay, fair enough. Working with the process this last time around, we were able to find someone for the property by me interviewing you and you breaking down all the elements of the property. And we spent 45 minutes in that unit in a studio, an alcove studio. And I couldn't believe it was that long. But then when I went back and looked at the footage, I'm like, that's how long it took to actually give all of the decisions their own justice, to give them their own time and explanation. And that's ultimately why that buyer bought that unit. She bought it sight unseen from Nashville, Tennessee, or near Nashville, Tennessee, because she watched that video and became enamored with the product. And it took that back and forth between you and I to really discuss the thought process you had as you put this thing together.
But that's the normal thought process. That's my thought process. And also, you have to really want to do it that way. You have to want to think about every detail in the space.
You have to care.
You have to care enough about it.
If you don't care, those things don't happen.
Otherwise, you're just picking flooring, tile, and bath fixtures and appliances.
It's kind of like the architecture experience you were discussing, where it became less about the product, more about just getting the sale done. We can put up whatever we need to on to the next.
Right.
And I never understood that with
flipping.
real estate. It's
basically flipping.
Yeah. And I never understood it because you're only as good as your last album, your last meal, whatever industry you're in. That's the thing. That last project should always speak to who you are, where you're at in your process.
at least my projects typically show that it's not a flip.
Mm-hmm.
I do buy my own property with you and flip them. I guess you could say they're flips, because if I'm living there, it's only for a short period of time, just to have it, to show how it can be lived in with furnishings. And
how was it sleeping in that alcove bed?
that was amazing. I tell you, I always had that concept. I always wanted to do that in a unit, a very small unit too. I wanted to do it, and that was an incredibly small unit. I wanted it to feel like kind of like a day bed during the day, but also kind of like an inner sanctum where you could kind of, that's why I put the shears instead of just having it as an alcove, just open.
It's that slight barrier to remove
The slight barrier. It's like a scrim, as they would say. It's a light film. It's used in the film industry to kind of separate spaces.
Okay. Adam's shaking his head over there. He's like, yep, scrim.
It's okay. Rebecca, Alfred Hitchcock's movie. Miss DeWinter's bedroom. My wife and I used to talk about this, how it was a scrim of shears to open up, and they just open up the way Hitchcock filmed it to show how exotic and amazing Miss DeWinter's was. And that's a scrim, but mine was a very minor scrim. But the idea in the studio was it's still all a part of the space, but no longer is it just one open box that's been decoupaged with vinyl plank flooring, tile backsplash, the typical stuff. There's only one closet that has doors on it.
Yeah, in the hallway.
In the living room.
Right, in the living room hallway. Yeah.
It's the only one that has doors on it.
Yeah.
So that there would be a sense of dressing area where I added the dresser out in the foyer space and on your way to the bathroom. That sense of, normally those would have just been doors in that bath hallway. There just would have been maybe 4 or 5 doors in there closing off that closet. And there wouldn't have been a sense of entry into the studio like the foyer does. So to do those things, you have to buy your own property and just do it. You're not going to find one like that that's been done like that. And although I hope other people see that project and see what you could do with the studio to make it much more than a studio, to make it feel much more comfortable. Getting up out of that bed in the morning every day, I got up, I could see out and there's the lake, there's the park. I didn't have to do anything other than get up.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to kind of close it off, I could pull the shears partly. I still had a sense of space with the rest. I didn't feel like I was in a little room that only had a bed in it. I felt like I was still a part of the space.
That would be a good part of that alcove is with the shears, because you can close it off, not feel tight, but also expand to the entire room and still see that view when you want.
Yeah, I didn't want it to be opaque. I didn't want it to be, it had to still have just that scrim, that separation that way. But getting back to what I was saying, I'm not a flipper, but if you really want to experiment architecturally and try to push the envelope and what could be good architecture for anyone, no matter what size home it is, you almost have to get in there and try to do it on your own. So I went out on my own the way back when. I have a ton of other things I want to try, but you have to find a home that is pretty beat up, and that's what we've done when the ones I bought, they're beat up.
Start from scratch.
You're starting from scratch.
I don't want to deal with anyone's opinion of what the space should be. I want to start with my own idea. And I've done that with 3 homes I live in now, and it's the best way. It can be stressful, but it's the best way in the end.
Well, it's certainly stressful. Every architectural project is stressful, and there's always some hidden bumps along the way. But the really good architects, and I know a number of them, can really solve those bumps along the way. They don't just say, okay, let the contractors figure it out, or it just has to be that way. They try to figure it out and they try to make it better. I had a project where we specified pre-finished hardwood floors. We got 2 samples of the hardwood, beautiful samples of the hardwood floor. We had to wait 12 weeks for it. That's a long time during a construction process. When they came, they weren't anything like the samples. Not a bit like the samples. We're 12 weeks in and we're ready to put the floor in that next week. We totally changed. It was a very bad time at that moment because that could have thrown the schedule. What if we pushed everything another 12 weeks out for another pre-finished floor? We couldn't do that.
And the client's not understanding.
And the client is not understanding. They want the project done. They're ready to move in. They've seen already the other nice things going in. They're ready to move in.
And to them, it's all your fault.
No,
not always?
not really.
Okay, good.
Usually if it's on the construction side, it's always the architect's fault.
Okay.
Not necessarily from the client, but it is presented that way a lot of times during the construction site. So what I did was I made a few calls, I had a number of sources, vendors, and we got some true rift cut white oak hardwood floors shipped in from Michigan within 4 days. We let it acclimate for a week. They were installed and then we site finished the floor because our schedule was screwed. We had to start putting.
When you say site finished, what does that mean?
The floor was sanded and finished after.
Oh, so you went from a pre-finished product to a finished product?
To a finished on site.
Got it.
Yeah. And the floors are beautiful.
The rift cut white oak that's the best, I think.
Yeah.
There's nothing better.
Beautiful look. And so instead of a pre-finished floor, it's a true hardwood floor, solid wood, same plank width, turned lemon into lemonade. That's what that client said over and over.
Yeah.
And it's right. And so if you can solve things like that can really, just think if you had to have just picked another pre-finished floor from who knows where that was readily available in stock, your choices would be so limited, it would have been a failure on that project, or it just would not have been very good.
Yeah.
I mean,
instead of lemon to lemonade, it would have been the opposite. It would have been
lemonade to
something
lemons. The client would have had to live with.
Yeah.
And how is
I
that
hate
ever
that
a
term.
good project?
Live with.
I gotta live with this.
Yeah.
It would have, so.
And I've felt that way on my own projects. I've pointed out things in my home to you where I'm just like,
Yeah.
you have to live with it. You find the best way around it because of timing. And for me, I've always wanted to move in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm waiting on the sidelines to move into the place, and I can't wait anymore. Because those things the things I'm talking about, a lot of other people will not notice. I'll notice because I've lived there, because I know about it, because I was there during the decision making. Other people doesn't even faze them.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff I see, people don't notice. They wouldn't notice. I actually have to point it out to them if it's a part of what we're doing architecturally. But yeah, but that's what I'm supposed to be. I feel that's what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
They're hiring an architect. They're not hiring another owner like themselves. They're looking for that expertise and that understanding of why something works better together at a certain scale than if you made it bigger and that other piece that is supposed to fit with were smaller. That's what I think I should be doing, and if that's done right, it does come off as an architectural work, not as a remodeled home.
What are your thoughts on an engineered floor versus a finished floor? So pre-finished versus finished.
I'd always go for the true hardwood floor, finished on site.
Why is that?
First of all, the joints are tighter.
Okay.
The finish is better. It looks less plasticky.
Yes.
It's more solid. You can glue, and we did that over at the studio you sold for me. We glued those down so they were much more solid.
So there's no shifting.
No shifting of the floor, no sponginess as you walk along the floor that pre-finished floors can have.
I just glued, on the project I'm doing right now, I glued the floor too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not a floating floor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's really the only way to make it somewhat successful with a pre-finished floor. A site finished floor, or a true hardwood floor, you can always come back and sand and sand and sand. You could do that probably at least 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
With a pre-finished floor, I just don't think that's possible, even though some of them say you can sand it twice.
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling it would not come out the way you thought it should be. Also, most pre-finished floors have to have some slight bevel between the pieces just so that they fit together. And so you've always got this reveal or this joint that's going to look darker or maybe lighter that to me it takes away from the beauty of the monolithic quality of a true hardwood floor or any hardwood floor.
It's also it's a gap for dust and other particles.
Junk's going to get in there. If you spill stuff and you don't wipe it up, all of a sudden it's going to fill that up, and so you got a layer of crud in there.
I've seen that. I'm selling someone's place and I'll point these things out to them, and I always feel bad because I feel like, I'm like, hey, you're a slob. But they're not. But that's how it comes off. I'm like, look, here's all these little things around the home that need really fine detail. And I think there should be a cleaning company that just does that, like the little fine details. Because when you're selling a place, you see that. I look in the gaps of people's floors. I'm looking on top of their baseboards. I'm looking at the vent covers. I'm looking at every little thing because I know people's eyes may gravitate to those if they spend enough time in the space.
That's right on. That's right on. Yeah. I will say though, as a caveat, true hardwood floors can shrink and you can get gaps between them too if the humidity isn't maintained properly.
Well, I think that's the biggest reason people use for not using them. And so what would be a perfect time to use engineered floors? When is a good application for it?
Probably in a situation where there is, you have extremely sensitive odor or smell requirements, because a pre-finished floor is not going to have any odor, but when you go in and stain and finish a true hardwood floor, there's going to be a smell. Even with water-based products, there's going to be an odor that can be off-putting to a neighbor. And so the other thing is it's much more difficult equipment-wise to do a true hardwood floor,
the whole process,
versus just laying a pre-finished floor and gluing it down.
I just had a bathroom done once. It's in my place I live in today, and I was so upset about this. The bathroom is done, the grout was curing, and the guy who came in never closed the door to the bathroom when they did the sanding.
And it got in the grout?
It got everywhere. It got everywhere. So I literally, this took hours, this took over a year. But just little, like whenever I had a time, I would go in with steel wool and just like clean out the grout of all this wood, all the sawdust that got in there.
Yeah.
I was so angry, so angry. And just a small detail, all you had to do was close the door.
Yeah.
Why didn't you close the door? Were you thinking?
Well, that's another one of my pet peeves just in architecture in general. And it was a pet peeve actually when I was with the larger firms. They didn't let you go to the job site. Most of the architects in the firm didn't get to go to the job site. I did because I was a manager of the projects, so I got to go, but maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every 3 weeks. If a problem happens on a job site, let's say the day after you were just there, it's going to be there for the rest of the project. There's no way you can come back in 3 weeks.
Too much time has passed.
Too much time has passed. Too many things have additionally gotten built. And that really irritated me because that happened. And as much as I wanted to solve them, as much as I would have been willing to spend whatever time to solve them, even the client didn't want to do it. They said, oh no, we're too far in the schedule. Don't want to lose 4 weeks to fix that. And so the construction companies always knew that. So that was always their out. Oh yeah, we'd be happy to fix it, but you know you're going to lose 4 weeks and ooh, I don't know if we can even fix it properly even after we do that. And it was like, okay.
And they're bringing up a
They're not
change order.
trying to do good architecture. They're just, what's their bottom line? That's all they're doing. And they're construction companies. They shouldn't be doing architecture. That's what they should be doing. But so I don't think it's their fault. I think it's the fault of the architects that they don't send their people out every day, every other day, to make sure they catch things the day of. And then there's no way they can come back and say, well, we've lost 4 weeks. Are you okay, Mr. Owner or Miss Owner, to give up 4 weeks before you can move in to fix that? They can't say that anymore. So you're protecting the architecture by doing that. But doesn't happen that way. But in my projects, I go every day, every other day at the worst. And it is true, you can catch a lot of issues. Like if I hadn't checked that, those samples, as soon as the day they came in, they might have been sitting around. Like if I couldn't go for another 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and the material was all there, I don't know if we would have been able to do the true hardwood floors. So, construction administration, being on site, managing the contractors is critical to a high level of architecture. Critical, critical. Their mindset isn't, it's on quality, but it's on craftsmanship from a artisan standpoint more so, like how can they fit the pieces of wood together in a beautiful way. They're not looking at how does that wood meet that drywall if you have a reveal in the drywall that has to line up exactly with the edge of that wood, because the drywall is a different construction company and the carpentry work is another construction company. So if you don't have someone there that
Those two don't
knows
talk.
all those pieces and how they're supposed to fit together, and typically in architecture, true, more higher or a more detailed sense of architecture, the tolerances are much tighter. Before you have a 3.5 inch casing, you can hide a bag out of square or out of the drywall doesn't quite fit with the frame of the door because that big trim can hide it. But if you're doing something more detailed or more refined, maybe there's just a 1/4 inch reveal between the frame of that door and the drywall finish. And so that drywall finish has to be almost dead on with the plane of that wood door frame. And if you're not there to, if nothing else, explain what you're trying to do to the contractors that are there, they're not going to get it. They're going to think it's like the home they just built that the tolerances were twice that.
That's one of my biggest frustrations when dealing with contractors is I'm trying to convey my image, my dream, what I want this to look like, and they want to keep telling me what it should look like. And that's, I respect your professionalism, I respect what you do, but this is what I want to do, and I've hired you to do it. Work with me. Stop trying to tell me and shove down my throat the way it should be. There's a reason I want to do it this particular way. And I found that great contractors, they get that.
Yeah.
They want to make that
Right.
happen for you. They want to work with you and they want to understand what you're doing. But the guy that's trying to get in and out, he's got no patience for it.
Well, even the guy that wants to get in and out, as long as you can convey to him what you're looking for before he gets started, where it doesn't impact his getting in and out, he knows right away that he has that tolerance. If you can get that in their mind early on, before they're into it, then you have a much higher percentage chance of having a successful detail.
That's a way.
But you got to be there. You got to be there.
So that's a way I've cut my teeth, or I've learned, because early projects that I've done, I've assumed they know that, because I'm being a fool, right? Because I'm an amateur and I'm trying to learn, and I assume they're going to know how to do it, and then I get there, halfway through, and I'm like, oh no, and then I'm blaming them. But then on further reflection the next day or that night, I'm like, no, this was my fuck up. Like, you know what? I ran the job. I should have known this. I should have told them.
The importance is you think you've communicated enough, but you can never not communicate more. So it's always better to tell them the same thing twice with the to the point of them saying, why are you telling me this again? Versus saying it only one time and they're thinking about their next lunch versus listening to what you're saying.
That is, I was on site with you once where someone said that to you. And you told me already, like, yeah, but.
Well, I'd rather be wrong and be redundant than to say something thinking they understood it and I didn't take the extra time to say it again.
Yeah.
Let them tell me they already know it. That'd be great for me to hear. Okay, now you know, and you've even told me you know, so I'm going to expect this to be dead on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to be there every day. The other thing that happens with construction is you don't always get the same crew. You'll get halfway through the project and all of a sudden the drywallers send a couple of new guys. They have no idea what's going on. They're ready to spread mud, or
Especially if they're picking off where someone else left off.
Yeah, so that happens all the time too. So if you're not there on site and they've shifted the crew to another job, and so you got a fresh crew in there and you don't even know it because you're not there for 2 weeks, good luck. Even no matter what you said, and you were redundant on saying it before, it went to the other crew. It didn't go to these new guys.
Yeah.
So.
What advice can you give to anyone who's starting a project? If you're a homeowner.
What?
Homeowner. You want to hire someone like yourself. They might be interviewing people or getting bids. What's the best advice you can give them to start that process well and end well?
Depends on the client. Some clients don't want the level of architecture. They just want something finished with fine finishes. And so in that case, they don't really need an architect. They just need a good contractor to come in. Will they get value for that? In my opinion, no, they won't. But there's an ongoing belief in the world that architects just spend people's money. And that's probably partially true, but so do general contractors. And if you look at the cost of fees to design something versus the cost of construction, the fees may be at the best or maybe 10% of the cost of the construction, and that's a pretty good amount of fees and work throughout the project. So there's 90% the owner can spend, let's say it's just 20% more versus that fee. The 20% on that 90%, if they didn't go that route, if they used an architect that actually did the construction management work like the way I do it, they would spend less money for the same product. Plus they'd have an architectural representative representing them, not the profit margin of the construction
of the GC
product.
Yeah.
And so there's just no way you can really go wrong to bring an architect in, someone on your side, unless the architect's no good.
I think that's great advice.
And there are architects that are not the right ones for your project, just like there are general contractors that are not the right ones for your project. So
I've always compared it to a personal shopper or even an interior designer, because that's the people that are doing these have more experience with those things. So I try to relate it to something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, if you've ever worked with a personal shopper, the personal shopper is going to say, I get discounts at these places, right? I have these connections. I'm going to make this easier. I know what you like. But beyond that, my fees really don't come up because I'm going to save you so much time or money on the process that I'm just free. It's like you're hiring me. I'm getting you discounts, but I'm also reducing the costs.
That's what's hard for people to realize about architects.
Yeah.
They don't, because it's been driven into them that it's different than that.
Yes, they see a line item, they see a cost that you cost, but they don't understand the cost you're saving them up here. That's the real disconnect when you get to an architect versus client relationship, at least in my experience.
That's right, that's right. The other thing that happens too is there are typically change orders throughout a project because the owner changes things, the architect maybe recommends something. Could be any one of they want another functional space that they hadn't thought of at the time. Who's checking the change order cost for the owner? Once the GC or group of contractors are hired, what's the motive for them to do it at cost for you? There is none. So they're going to mark that up. And because it maybe gets in their schedule of where they're ready to go to the next project, and it delays the project a little bit, they're going to put more money in there. And in some ways that may be fair, but I've seen change order costs that are 5 times the cost of what it was. I had one, the guy wanted $5,400. We ended up doing it for $1,200 with that same guy. So he wanted 4 times the cost, more than 4.5 times the cost. If I hadn't have been there, what do you think the owner would have paid for that change order? $5,400.
Exactly. Maybe 5, and they would have thought they got a good.
Yeah.
They negotiated it down.
Yeah. He said,
I love that.
I guess I can do that.
Let's just mark it up 3 times. We'll come down a few hundred. Okay, you win.
Yeah. That's
a contractor trick.
That is standard procedure.
SOP.
And every project. Yeah. Every residential project.
I helped a friend recently with something. She had this construction project she just never got it off the ground. She wanted to do this for a year. She wanted to remodel. She wasn't doing it. She's complaining about it one day. I'm like, person's name, just pay me. Pay me. It isn't even what I do, but I deal with enough people in this space. I will get it done for you. And so right off the bat, I charged her $5,000 to do it. And then I even brought my fee down to $2,500 when it was clear that the contractor was going to be taking on more responsibilities than I initially thought I was going to do. It's a friend, so I wanted to help her out.
Yeah.
I shaved off $3,500 off the bid. There we go. I paid for myself.
There you go. Paid for yourself.
Paid for myself immediately, right off the bat. And that was just a friend in a small project. It was like a $15,000 project. It wasn't a big project.
Well, same thing with that hardwood floor that we had to go from pre-finished to site finished. I had vendors that I could buy at cost for the products. I didn't mark them up. I was getting the fee to do the construction management from my client. I had no need. I'm still getting paid. Yes. I had no need to mark that up like a construction company maybe has a need to do that or figures that's a source of income for them as a change order.
I definitely think there's a source of income.
So just that change alone, I think we did a true hardwood floor, site finished and then stained and finished, is not the same price as a glued down pre-finished floor. Yeah. It's quite a bit more. I don't think we spent any more. I'd have to check my numbers, but because we bought the wood at cost, I had a great source for that. I had a number of hardwood flooring contractors that we brought in that I'd worked with before, and we hired one of them. So we took that out of the GC's contract, and the GC had a markup in there because he was just paying a sub to lay the hardwood floor. Yeah. He wasn't doing it. So I think we either did it for the same or maybe a little bit less. And that's another thing that the client saw, that you can't hide if you're managing the project for the client. You see every number all along the way. As a client, you see every number. There's no way a client is protected if there isn't someone like that architect there to make sure those numbers are real.
I think that's a great way to end. We could do this for hours as we have before, and I need to go out and sell some real estate.
Okay, well, I gotta get my shot.
Good, yeah, let's do it.
I'm feeling
Thanks
good.
for doing this.
Sure.
Appreciate it, Dennis.